Speaker Hall, I thank you so much for sitting down with me. So first, I just want to start off by, looking back. How do you think your first year as Speaker has gone?
I couldn't be happier. I came in with the House Republican majority with a plan, and we've executed that plan. And I think people got exactly what they voted for and what they wanted when they elected a Republican House majority in Michigan. Michigan was the only chamber, the Michigan House, to flip in the entire country. And the reason for that was the Democrats spent our entire state surplus, over $9 billion, all kinds of pork spending, all kinds of wasteful grant programs, ghost employees. These are fake workers that they use to pad programs, corporate giveaways. And they were talking about tax increases. So when I became Speaker, we said, we're going to put a stop to that. We're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. We're going to make the budget smaller than last year. We're going to go through every line item in the budget looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. We identified $5 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse in the budget. And we were successful in getting Governor Whitmer to eliminate $800 million of that waste, fraud, and abuse. That was 2,000 ghost employees, which cost $200 million. Some wasteful grant programs. We reduced a lot of the corporate giveaways, and we significantly cut pork spending. The pork spending cut by 87% this year. And that's how we delivered a budget that was smaller than last year. We gave Michigan workers relief through no tax on tips, overtime, and Social Security. And I wanted to do that at the state level to really amplify the working families tax cut that President Trump passed at the federal level. So now Michigan workers will have no tax on their tips and overtime at the state level, and our seniors will also have no taxes on their Social Security at the state level, along with the federal level, so that they really get more relief in these times where it's such an important thing for people.
Mm-hmm. You got down to the wire with that budget. I mean, was it hard to work through that? I mean, was it a good working relationship with the House and the Senate?
So this is the first time in Michigan's history where the House is Republican and the governor and the Senate are Democrat. So the people wanted to put kind of a backstop to block a lot of the radical left legislation that the Democrats were ramming through. They repealed right to work. They got rid of the third grade reading law. They got rid of the A through F standards so we could easily understand how schools were performing. They got rid of all kinds of accountability in education, and they were really leading us down a road where the corporations were getting so much money. There was all kinds of pork spending, and a tax increase was on the horizon, and they were starting to talk about that. So the people said, we got to put the brakes on this, elect a Republican House. I forged a great relationship with Governor Whitmer. Her and I went to the Oval Office earlier this year. We met with President Trump. We asked President Trump to help us with three things. Help us land a new fighter mission for Selfridge Air National Guard Base. Help us protect the Great Lakes and Lake Michigan from the invasive species, the Asian carp. And help get us relief funding for northern Michigan. President Trump committed to do all three of those things in that meeting. And then, it was just great when he came in. He flew into Selfridge to announce the new fighter mission. I was there with Governor Whitmer. We both spoke alongside him. That's going to keep that fighter mission and that base open for 40 years because of that. So I'd say working with President Trump, going to the Oval Office, coming up with a common federal agenda for Michigan, we were able to kind of forge trust in a relationship that carried us through this budget, even though there are a lot of obstructionist legislative Democrats.
I noticed in that list of you left out Leader Brinks. Would you expand more on your relationship with her and how that's working?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting name for her, Leader Brinks, because she's not much of a leader. But I'll say that fortunately, with me as the leader of the Republicans and Gretchen Whitmer as the leader of the Democrats, we were able to forge a relationship that willed that budget into getting done. And really, there are two cornerstones of that budget that we got done. The first is we finally put the money in permanently needed to fix our local roads. Governor Whitmer called on when she ran the first time she was elected to fix the roads. And yet she never succeeded in getting permanent funding for roads. When I came in with the House Republicans, we said, look, let's finally fix local roads. So we put a plan forward by cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, getting rid of corporate welfare. We could actually fund our roads without raising taxes. Governor Whitmer came back and said, Matt Hall is the only legislative leader I've worked with, and that includes Brinks, that has the guts and the brains to put a roads plan forward and pass it through their chamber. Then her and I worked together. She really wanted to raise taxes. So I said to her, look, I'll match you dollar for dollar, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse permanently and dedicating it to roads, and we'll give you some revenue. And that was the marijuana tax that she came up with that went into effect this year, or is going into effect this coming year. But what I was proudest about that is we're finally dedicating all of the money collected at the pump to roads. When I first ran in 2019, I said, why is it that we have one of the highest gas taxes in the country, but one of the lowest percentages of the money collected at the pump goes to roads? Now all of it will go to roads. We're going to see over $2 billion a year into local roads every year, and most of that is going to go into local roads. The second key thing that happened in the budget was HEAT, the Hall Ethics, Accountability, and Transparency Plan, which I championed, which was to force the politicians to own up to their pork spending. Disclose it in advance, put your name on it, tell us the public benefit. You should be proud of your pork spending. Far too much of the legislative pork spending was secretive. It was shoved in at the last minute. There are criminal investigations going on, and we saw all kinds of wasteful spending. Baseball stadiums, splash pads, hip-hop academies, all kinds of things that are not a good use for your tax dollars that we stopped. Because now the politician looks at it and says, I'm not putting my name on that. And we can really evaluate these projects and get better value for your dollars. And that's one of the reasons the pork spending dropped 87% this year in the budget. I think we did some good things. I mean, Steve Frisbee did a great job in Battle Creek, getting, equipment for the Calhoun County Sheriff, fixing a local bridge in his district in Sheridan Township, all kinds of things. Those are good things and good uses. But no more baseball stadiums and splash pads and hip-hop academies and Zen centers and all this stuff. That needs to stop, and it will with this transparency.
So you talked about HEAT, and then let's talk a bit about the $645 million in work projects that the House put a kibosh to, denied. There was a lot of blowback from that, from community organizations that was receiving this money, from Democrats, and some Republicans even in the Senate. You say that you're going to take a look at some of these projects, which you felt were good, some of them were, and put them through HEAT next year.
Yes.
What do you say to those people that just criticize the effort altogether, and what is your timeline for putting those projects through HEAT?
First of all, I do want to say on the budget, so in the end what happened was we prevented a long government shutdown. We did not have a government shutdown, really. We got it done. We gave the governor a clean continuing resolution, and everything worked out. So unlike the federal level, we got it done. What ultimately happened was, because of that trust and that relationship that Governor Whitmer and I had, we were able to make that budget happen. And what happened in the end was Democrat legislators like Brinks, they ended up empowering Governor Whitmer. Her and I made a deal. And Democrats like Winnie Brinks, they performed on the deal. So the good news was my relationship with Winnie Brinks didn't matter because she followed Gretchen Whitmer's lead. That's the way it should work, right? The Republican leader meets with the Democrat leader. We made a deal, and the other Democrats performed. And overwhelmingly, Republicans voted for this as well. So it was really a great deal that was smaller than last year, that cut $800 million of waste, fraud, and abuse. And we did it bipartisan. And the other thing is we protected Medicaid. You saw the Democrats constantly whining about Medicaid. Well, I went to work with the Trump administration. I learned everything I could about the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I realized there were some very minor changes. All we had to do was make some very minor changes to be in compliance with federal law. We would get all of our Medicaid money. So we proposed that. I brought it to the governor and Brinks. They liked it, and we got that done. So all that stuff you hear about Medicaid, we're going to have all our Medicaid funding for this year. Now, you asked me about the work projects. You know, I mean, all year we've been identifying waste, fraud, and abuse. You know, the governor has built an over $10 billion slush fund. Okay, now that's a pretty big slush fund. And what's happening is rather than spend money at the end of the year, now the government has way too much money. They can't spend it all by the end of the year. That's why $10 billion is in a slush fund. The governor said, I want $2.7 billion more to put into a slush fund for the next 5 years. We looked at it and said, we'll approve $2.1 billion of it, but there's $645 million here that we're going to not approve. So, and really, it should not be the norm that you don't spend the money at the end of the year. You got to think about how much that is, $645 million. We put it into the general fund, and now next year we're going to have a negotiation about the best use for it. What we saw with these work projects, number one, a lot of this was stuff like the illegal alien welfare benefits through the Office of Global Michigan. We saw millions of dollars for tampons, all kinds of bathrooms all over state government. We saw all the Biden-era climate programs, the EV chargers all along the Lake Michigan lakeshore, all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse, symphony grants, all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse. And so we cut it, we put it in the general fund, and now we're going to have a negotiation on a better use for that. The other thing we saw with the slush funds was they were taking, all right, so a program would get money in 2024, not spend it, 2025, not spend it, and they got money again in 2026. And so we're saying, we're going to cut your money from 2025 and just spend your 2024 and 2026 money. And once you start spending money, we'll give you more. But why are you guys not spending millions of dollars? And there are hundreds of these. And that's how you get that big of a slush fund.
Do you have a timeline for when you might put these through heat and look at them again?
Well, and that's key, right? And now they're going to go through heat. When these things went into the budget, they were secretive. They got shoved in the middle of the night. Many times, they'd only need $1 million. They'd ask for $3 million. They'd get to $3 million, and now they don't know what to spend it on. And it just sits there for years and years and years. And yet they're talking about raising your taxes while they have a $10 billion slush fund sitting in government. So, you know, we're going to put heat on them. They're going to have to disclose it. They're going to have to put their name on it, talk about the public purpose. They're going to have to explain the date of completion, something you did not have to do before, obviously, because we're seeing the result. And then we're going to go through it, and by March, April, you know, we'll make a deal, and we'll fund some of them, the ones that are justified. But there's going to be a lot of other things that don't get funded because they're waste, fraud, and abuse.
But you did see some people, you know, from these organizations, you know, like RX Kids. There was the Hamtramck fire chief that came and testified in the Senate for uses like a fire truck or to give medications to new parents and those with infants. What do you say to those programs? So
RX Kids is a great example. They got $20 million last year. They spent $2 million. And then the Democrats gave them $270 million for this year. So I think they'll be just fine with the $270 million, but they're whining about $18 million from last year. I think we can put that $18 million to better use. And what we see, unlike RX Kids comes out of the benefits that go to other cash welfare programs. They go to Child Protective Services. And we actually have a shortfall in this fund. It's called TANF. And there's a shortfall here. And so we actually need that money to spend on long existing programs that people rely on. So we're going to take a large part of that $18 million and cover that shortfall. And that's something the press isn't talking about. They have $270 million. There's a shortfall in TANF for all these other programs. So we're saying let's cut it and let's put it in those long existing programs instead of this program which is overfunded for next year. And then as we go through it, we'll hear everybody's explanation for why they didn't spend the money in a full year. But again, you look at all the EV chargers, the Biden era climate programs, the illegal alien welfare benefits. There was a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse here. We cut it, and then we're going to get a better use for it.
And you were proud of the fact that there was a small number of public acts this year. And I'm not sure if it broke the record, but it was near that record.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about that.
You're right. We set the record for fewest public acts in a year. I would just say by year 7 of Whitmer, to the extent that she had good ideas, a lot of those have been done. Now we're in year 7, year 8, and we looked at it. We said we're going to focus on quality instead of quantity. We got roads done. We got no tax on tips, overtime, Social Security done. We got earmark disclosure through the Hall Ethics Accountability and Transparency Plan done. We saved the restaurant industry and protected tip workers at the beginning of this year. We saved thousands of restaurants from closure. We got paid sick leave for Michigan workers, but we did it in a way that works for employers too. So there were so many big things that we did, but I didn't want to be speaker to pass 500 bills and just so I could pat myself on the back and say, I have 50 public acts with my name on it. And meanwhile, they're adding all kinds of new regulations and all kinds of taking away of your freedoms and liberties. I mean, a lot of people were happy today when we went sine die because they said, woo, I have a relief now. I don't have to worry about what these politicians are doing up in Lansing. Sometimes it's not a good thing when they're looking for more work to do. I think people want us to focus on the things that really matter. We did that with roads. We did that with education. We delivered record funding in education this year, and we cut all the pork spending out of education. For years, they would just shove it up with pork. That's money that could be going in the classroom. But what the politicians in Lansing were doing is they were saying, I want to take the money off the top and give it to my preferred vendors, often that are connected to donors and lobbyists. And we took all that away and said, let's put it all in the classroom so our local school boards and principals and teachers can have that money instead of people's donors and lobbyists in Lansing. We're seeing through the pork spending, a lot of the lobbyists are getting win bonuses. They're getting fees for association management, which is a way for them to grift off of the taxpayer. Why are taxpayers funding lobbyists? That's why we got rid of a lot of those work projects, because the lobbyists were making all kinds of money off of you, off of that. That shouldn't happen. Lobbyists should not get money in the budget.
Was there anything that you weren't able to get done this year that you're looking forward to working on next year?
Well, I think it was really a perfect year. I mean, you look at, we brought oversight to state government. We're holding the Whitmer administration accountable. We're really focusing on lowering the error rates in welfare. And it's funny, they call it error rates. But really what they're doing is they're paying out your tax dollars to people that are not eligible. And Michigan has such a high error rate that they're actually going to get fined by the Trump administration if we don't get it under control, because they're paying out so much fraud. Well, this year, through our oversight efforts, we recognize that if we have a chip card for our welfare programs, we can really cut down on that fraud. And so we got the Whitmer administration to agree to that, and I think that's really going to help lower our fraud rates. So we're going to keep looking at all these programs and eliminating the waste, fraud, and abuse so we get better value for your tax dollars. Now, there's going to be more waste, fraud, and abuse to cut next year, but I'm looking for next year at property tax reform. You know, it's something I hear a lot from people across the state in Kalamazoo and Allegan counties as well, is property taxes are too high. They've gone up about 5% a year under Biden's inflation. And so what we need to do is we need to, look at how to lower the rates every year and help people to be able to afford their homes. Also, I'm looking at the cost of health care, which is out of control. We passed legislation through the House last week to have price transparency on hospitals. We're going to try to get that across to the governor to sign next year. These hospitals, they charge whatever they want, and the prices keep going up, and someone needs to hold them accountable. and we're going to hold them accountable and help lower the cost of health care. You talk to these small businesses, their premiums are going up 20% a year. It's out of control. Now, I think President Trump has done great work with Trump RX, with most favored nation status, with Ozempic, to lower the drug costs. But these hospital costs are out of control. Someone needs to hold them accountable, and we will this year.
I know that in the budget negotiations, you agreed with Leader Brinks and the governor to work on economic development. Do you have a plan there?
Well, unfortunately, the Democrats got a little distracted there at the end, and we didn't get it done by the end of the year. But we're going to look and see if that's something we can still do in the coming year. I'll say, this is Governor Whitmer's last year. She's talked about literacy. And I'm excited to work with her on literacy and improving literacy in our schools. I'm looking at some of the things they did in Mississippi, which are very similar to the things that Rick Snyder was doing, the former Republican governor, which was accountability in education, measuring schools in an easy way to understand, using teacher performance as a measure of their, looking at the student performance as a measure of teacher performance. Because if we're not looking at how the kids are doing, how can you evaluate the teachers? It should have some impact the way the students are performing. And then looking at kids being able to read by third grade through a third grade reading law. So I'm very excited to work with her on literacy, on economic development, and all kinds of things in this last year of her administration.
I have a couple more questions. You have been accused by Democrats in both the House and the Senate of political gamesmanship in the actions such as the work projects or the transmittal of the bills that went to court. What do you have to say to that?
Well, today's the last day of the legislative session. They call that sine die. The Democrats wouldn't know that because they didn't have a sine die last year. There actually was no end. And they didn't know how to present bills to the governor. So when I became speaker, it was a mess, an absolute mess. They did not adjourn properly. They did not present bills to the governor. We put it up for a vote in the House, and Republicans and Democrats voted to not present these bills to the governor. So we looked at it and said, can you governor shop? You pass a bill and you don't send it to the governor, and you wait, 10, 20 years and you send it to the governor? That doesn't make sense. So the way that the body felt was the natural end of the time to send a bill to the governor is when the session ends and a new legislature comes in. That's the end. Now, I was Speaker 8 days, and the Democrats sued me and the House, and it was the first time in Michigan's history where the House and Senate are suing each other. I'd say it's pretty remarkable that we got so many things done. But the reason we did that was because the great relationship that I forged and the trust with Governor Whitmer. We willed it into happening, fixing our local roads, delivering a budget smaller than last year, no tax on tips, overtime, and Social Security, cutting $800 million of waste, fraud, and abuse, having earmark transparency, saving the restaurant industry, protecting people's paid sick leave, but ensuring they have a job. We did a lot. As I look at their complaints about us cutting their wasteful spending, I'm a master of the rules and the law. And everything that I've done has been within the rules and the law. And the Democrats, they should have been smarter about how they wrote the budget. You can pre-negotiate. So in this last budget we did, if it was a 3-year program, we could put it in the budget as a 3-year program. They didn't do that. These are 1-year programs that are going on for years and years and years. They're not spending the money. So we're saying if it was intended to be a 1-year program, we cut it at the end of 1 year, and we're trying to get answers. Why aren't you guys spending this money? They can complain all they want, but we're following the rules and the law, and we have a charge from the people of Michigan to get better value for your tax dollars. When we see billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse, we're going to cut that waste, fraud, and abuse, and we're going to find a better use for it. This was the first time in Michigan's history under the Public Safety Trust Fund, something I worked with Mayor Mike Duggan on, where we're making investments in our local police departments. And we're not patching, budget holes. We're putting this money to new police and new equipment, and we're tying it to performance for lowering violent crime rates in some of our cities. And I'm very hopeful, because I got this done in the budget this year, that we're going to see lower violent crime rates in our cities across Michigan. That's what people care about, and we can do that with our existing funding. So I think we should be looking to get better use for our dollars. We should be cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And we shouldn't always be looking for a tax hike on the working people of Michigan like what the Democrats are proposing.
Going into 2026, it's an election year. How confident are you that the Republicans can keep the House, take the Senate, and the governor's mansion?
Well, what we're doing in the House really is a blueprint for Republican governance in the future. And traditionally, you've seen, since at least the 1960s, it kind of switches back for 8 years of Democrat, 8 years of Republican. So Whitmer's been in there for 8 years, and so I think a Republican is favored. We've got some great candidates: John James, Eric Nesbitt, Mike Cox, Tom Leonard, Ralph Rebrandt. We've got some great candidates running. And I think whoever comes out of that is going to have the support of President Donald Trump, who's a unifying figure in the Republican Party. On the Democrat side, the Democrats are kind of splintering between independent candidate Mike Duggan, who is Biden's campaign chair and is a Democrat, and potentially Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State. And I think you'll see fractured Democrat Party between Duggan and Benson. It's kind of the moderate Democrats and the extreme left Democrats. And I think with Trump's backing, the Republican candidate will win with probably less than 50%. I think we're well positioned to keep the House. I think showing people all the results, right? Getting a smaller budget than last year, HEAT, the Hall Ethics, Accountability, and Transparency Plan, really bringing transparency to government spending. You look at what we did with the restaurant industry, save restaurants across Michigan, saving paid sick leave and having jobs for people, all kinds of things we did this year. I think they're going to want more. And as we lead in the future with property tax relief, tackling healthcare affordability, energy, I mean, the Democrats put an energy law in place when they controlled everything that now everyone agrees is going to severely increase your energy bills because their wind and solar mandates don't work. They're too expensive. They want to ban natural gas by 2040. That's what their law says. Well, natural gas is the most clean and affordable and reliable energy source. We're going to see huge increases in your utility bills because of the new Democrat energy law. We've got to fix that. We've got to put forward a modern energy law that's going to lower your rates and is going to have fossil fuels. So energy costs, healthcare costs, property taxes, education reform, focusing on accountability in education and ensuring our kids can read. I think for those reasons, people are going to want Republican leadership from the governor on down to the State House next year.
You talk about energy. A big topic is data centers. What are your thoughts on those? Yeah,
so the data centers are very interesting. So, one data center it uses a lot of power. I talked to DTE recently. They said one data center is like 10% of their whole capacity for their whole grid, okay? That's how big these things are. I mean, somebody told me one of them was like the power of like Macomb County, Oakland County, and Monroe County, just one data center. And now there are a bunch of them trying to come here at once. And so this is really going to force a conversation about new natural gas plants. And again, that's going to put more pressure on that Democrat energy law, which bans natural gas and tries to go 100% wind and solar by 2040. You're not going to get reliable energy that way. You're not going to be able to power all these data centers that way. And my fear is that they're going to start pushing that cost of the new power generation onto the ratepayers, and that's going to compound the increases in your utility bills. So my hope is that these regulatory bodies will very carefully monitor that and ensure that regular people, working people, are not paying higher bills because of the data centers.
So you're welcoming of the data centers, you just want them to be well regulated?
I think they should be well regulated. We had a bill last year when the Democrats controlled everything to create tax breaks and incentives for data centers. I voted against that. I don't think these are the kind of businesses that we should be giving incentives to, because they don't employ a lot of people. So it's like you give millions of dollars of incentives to a company that maybe employs 35 people. Now, these are constantly under construction, and so they create a lot of good paying union jobs. But we really could be spending our tax dollars on attracting companies that have more jobs and pay higher wages. But with that said, I'm fine with data centers coming into the state. I don't think we should incentivize them, but I do think that we need to be sure we regulate them properly so that they don't raise our energy prices.
And my final question is about the Broncos.
Oh, sure.
They did great, winning the MAC championship and going to the bowl and prevailing there. Are you going to have them here at the Capitol?
I'd love to. We had the hockey team here, the national champions, in my office where we are right now. And on this table, I'm talking to you, they brought the national championship trophy and put it right on this table. So proud of our Bronco hockey team and our Bronco football team. Just Coach Lance Taylor's been doing a great job. Great team, and I'm looking forward to having them here to celebrate the first time in Western's history where they won the MAC championship and won their bowl game. Is really impressive, and I'm looking forward to having them here to celebrate one of the best seasons in the history of Western Michigan football.
And Ferris too, with the national championship in D2.
Yeah, I think Tom Kuntz will probably invite them up. He's a state rep from Big Rapids, and they've been doing a great job at Ferris State in their division, and it's nice. I think it's like 4 times in the last 5 years they've won, which is really impressive.
Thank you so much,
All right,
Speaker
thanks,
Hall.
man. Yeah.